Chapter 1. The invitation that nobody asked for. So there I was, staring at what could generously be called the most pretentious piece of interstellar correspondence in the known galaxy. The Galactic Peace Council, and yes, they actually call themselves that with completely straight faces, had sent Earth yet another invitation to their annual Harmony Through Understanding Summit. The holographic document shimmered with self-importance, written in 17 different languages, including 3 that were just fancy ways of saying, "We're better than you," in diplomatic speak. At the bottom, in what I can only assume was meant to be helpful fine print, it noted, "Military personnel and advisors welcome, but not required." Not required. Right. My name's Lieutenant Colonel David Cross, and I've been Earth's unofficial why we don't send soldiers to tea parties expert for the better part of a decade. It's not an official title, mind you. But when you're the guy who has to explain to increasingly confused alien diplomats why humanity keeps showing up to peace talks with nothing more threatening than a briefcase and a firm handshake, you tend to develop a reputation. The thing is, the galaxy's other species seem to operate under this quaint assumption that peaceful negotiations require at least a show of military force. You know, just to keep things honest. The Vorthak bring their battle-scarred generals who've seen more action than a caffeine-addicted day trader. The Zalani delegation always includes at least 3 ceremonial warriors who could probably bench press a small moon. Even the notoriously pacifist Hrothgar show up with their defense advisors, which is apparently what you call people who can kill you 17 different ways with a salad fork when you're trying to maintain plausible deniability. But Earth? Earth sends accountants, lawyers, the occasional anthropologist who gets way too excited about alien social structures. And me. The guy whose job it is to explain why we're not bringing anyone who knows which end of a weapon is the dangerous one. Cross! The voice of Secretary Williams echoed down the hallway of the United Nations building, carrying with it the distinct tone of someone who was about to make my day significantly more complicated. Conference room 3 now! I folded the holographic invitation, because apparently even alien bureaucracy comes with the ability to crease, and made my way down the corridor. The UN building hadn't changed much since first contact 15 years ago, except for the addition of 17 new floors to accommodate our expanded diplomatic needs and what the architects generously called species-specific atmospheric requirements. What they meant was, some aliens breathe methane, and we'd rather not have to mop up diplomats. Secretary Williams was already seated at the conference table when I arrived, along with Ambassador Peterson and a woman I didn't recognize, but who had the look of someone who'd seen things. Military things, possibly exploding things. Cross, meet Colonel Elizabeth Vance, Williams said without preamble. She's our new military liaison for complicated situations. Vance stood and offered a handshake that could have doubled as a vice grip. Colonel, I've heard about your work with the Peace Council. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating is one word for it, I replied, settling into my chair. Let me guess. They want to know why Earth's delegation to this year's summit is going to consist of 3 diplomats, 2 trade negotiators, and a xenobiologist who's probably going to spend the entire time asking inappropriate questions about alien reproductive cycles. Close, Williams said, sliding a tablet across the table. They want to know why we're not bringing you. I blinked. Then I read the message displayed on the tablet. Then I blinked again, because sometimes the universe delivers punchlines that require a double take. The message was from High Coordinator Zeftar of the Vorthak delegation, and it was, well, it was something. Esteemed colleagues of Earth's diplomatic corps, we have noted with increasing concern that your species continues to attend these gatherings without proper military representation. While we appreciate humanity's commitment to peaceful resolution, we fear that your delegates may be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of galactic diplomatic protocol. Military advisors serve not merely as symbols of strength, but as essential participants in the negotiation process. They provide strategic insight, tactical assessment, and, perhaps most importantly, the credible threat necessary for meaningful compromise. We respectfully request that Earth consider bringing at least 1 military representative to this year's summit. We suggest Lieutenant Colonel Cross, whose explanations of human military doctrine have been both enlightening and, frankly, somewhat concerning. We await your response with great interest and only moderate apprehension. High Coordinator Zeftar. First among the battle-tested keeper of the 7 sacred wounds, really quite good at chess. I looked up from the tablet. They want me there to explain why I'm not usually there? It gets better, Colonel Vance said with what might have been a smirk. Read the attached files. I scrolled down to find what appeared to be transcripts of previous diplomatic encounters. The first one was labeled Summit of Minds, year 2 to 157, and included a notation that made my blood pressure spike. Terran military doctrine, as explained by Lieutenant Colonel Cross, classified concern level orange. Orange? I said. What the hell is orange? It's between mildly troubling and maybe we should keep an eye on these people, Williams explained. Apparently some of your previous explanations have been interpreted in ways we didn't anticipate. I started reading. Transcript excerpt. Summit of Minds, Day 3. Present, High Coordinator, Zeftar, Vorthak, Prime Negotiator, Silthes, Zelani, Defense Advisor, Grompth, Hrothgar, Lieutenant Colonel Cross, Terra, Zeftar. Colonel Cross, perhaps you could explain why Terra chooses not to bring military advisors to these proceedings. Cross. Well, it's pretty simple, really. We don't want to give anyone the wrong idea. Silthes. The wrong idea about what? Cross. About what we're capable of when we're actually trying to hurt something. Extended pause in transcript. Grompth. Could you elaborate on that statement? Cross. Look, the thing about human military doctrine is that it's not really designed for the kind of measured, proportional response that makes for good diplomacy. When we fight, we tend to fight like we mean it. Bringing actual military personnel to a peace summit would be like bringing a flamethrower to a dinner party. Technically possible, but it sends the wrong message. Zeftar. Surely you exaggerate for effect. Cross. Do I? Let me put it this way. Your species has a proud warrior tradition going back thousands of years. You have codes of honor, ritual combat, ceremonial weapons that double as art pieces. Very civilized. Very proper. When humans fight, we use whatever works. We've weaponized everything from kitchen utensils to orbital mechanics. We once won a war by convincing the enemy that their own shadows were trying to kill them. Silthes, that seems improbable. Cross. Psychological warfare, prime negotiator. We're really good at it. Almost uncomfortably good. The point is, when you bring warriors to a peace summit, everyone understands the subtext. When we bring accountants and lawyers, everyone stays focused on the actual negotiation, instead of wondering if we're planning to turn their homeworld into a parking lot. End excerpt. I set the tablet down slowly. Okay, I can see how that might have been misinterpreted. Keep reading, Vance said. It gets worse. The next transcript was from a trade negotiation 2 years later. Apparently, I'd been asked to explain human economic warfare. Cross. The beautiful thing about economic warfare is that nobody realizes they're losing until it's way too late. You start by making yourself indispensable. Everyone needs what you're selling. Then you gradually adjust the terms until you're not just a trade partner, you're a dependency. By the time anyone figures out what's happening, backing out would cause more damage than staying in. Trade Minister Vex Cole, Regelian Commonwealth. This sounds predatory. Cross. Predatory? No. Predators are straightforward. They hunt, they kill, they eat. This is more like being a really helpful parasite. You don't even notice us until we've restructured your entire economy around our convenience. Oh, come on, I said to the room in general. That was a joke. I was explaining comparative economic theory. Read the analysis, Williams said grimly. I scrolled to find a document titled Assessment of Terran Economic Warfare Capabilities, compiled by the Galactic Trade Commission. The summary was concerning. Based on statements by Lieutenant Colonel Cross and subsequent analysis of Terran trade patterns, we conclude that Earth may be engaged in systematic economic colonization of multiple sectors. Their approach appears designed for maximum integration with minimal visibility. Recommend monitoring of all major trade agreements for evidence of deliberate dependency creation. They think we're economically colonizing half the galaxy? I looked around the room. Are we economically colonizing half the galaxy? That's not the point, Williams said, though he didn't actually answer the question. The point is that your explanations of why we don't bring military personnel to diplomatic functions have created the impression that we're some kind of strategic masterminds who are always playing a deeper game. Colonel Vance leaned forward. There's more. Tell him about the incident. Williams winced. Ah, yes, the incident. He pulled up another file, this one marked with enough security warnings to power a small star. Summit of Cooperation 3 years ago. You were asked about human contingency planning. I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach. Oh no. Oh yes. Transcript excerpt. Summit of Cooperation, Day 5. Present, various delegates, Lieutenant Colonel Cross, Terra. Strategic Advisor Kenthavar, Centauri Alliance. Colonel Cross, in the interest of transparency, could you share some details about Terra's contingency planning for Hypothetical conflicts. Cross. Hypothetical conflicts? Well, that's a pretty broad category. Are we talking about trade disputes, border skirmishes, full-scale warfare, or civilization-ending catastrophes? Kenthvar. Perhaps full-scale warfare? Cross. Okay, well, the basic principle is pretty straightforward. You identify critical infrastructure, supply lines, communication networks, and command structures. Then you figure out how to neutralize all of them simultaneously, with minimal resource expenditure. Several delegates requesting clarification. Cross. Think of it like, imagine you're playing a game where the objective is to flip the board over and declare victory. You don't win by playing better. You win by changing the rules so that playing at all becomes impossible for your opponent. Defense Coordinator Morthek, Captain Federation. Could you provide a more concrete example? Cross. Sure. Let's say, hypothetically, we're in a conflict with a species that relies heavily on orbital manufacturing platforms. Traditional military thinking might focus on destroying those platforms. Human thinking focuses on making them irrelevant. Maybe we crash their economy so they can't afford to maintain them. Maybe we convince their workers that the platforms are haunted. Maybe we hack their environmental systems so that every time someone tries to work there, the gravity randomly reverses. The point is, there are always at least 17 different ways to solve any given problem. And at least 12 of them will leave your opponent wondering what the hell just happened. Extended pause. Morthek. You said 17 different ways? Cross. Oh, that's just for starters. Give us a weekend and some dedicated planning time, and we'll come up with 50. Give us a month and we'll come up with solutions for problems that don't even exist yet. I stopped reading and looked up at three faces that ranged from concerned to amused to mildly terrified. They think we're criminal masterminds, I said slowly. They think you're criminal masterminds, Williams corrected. The rest of us are apparently just really good at pretending to be harmless while our military develops increasingly exotic ways to end civilization. Colonel Vance was definitely smirking now. The best part is the follow-up report from their intelligence services. They've been trying to figure out what the 17 ways are, and they've identified 43 potential methods and are convinced they're missing the obvious ones. I buried my face in my hands. So let me get this straight. The reason they want me at this summit is because they think I'm going to accidentally reveal the secret human master plan for galactic domination? That's about the size of it, Williams said. The question is, are you willing to go? I looked at the invitation again, then at the transcripts, then at Colonel Vance, who was clearly enjoying this way too much. What's the worst that could happen? Chapter 2. The Summit of Increasingly Poor Decisions. 3 weeks later, I found myself aboard the Galactic Peace Council's diplomatic vessel, Harmony's Dream, which was either named by someone with a profound sense of irony, or by someone who'd never actually met a diplomat. The ship was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by 7 different species, powered by Vorthak fusion cores, navigated by Zalani quantum computers, and decorated with what the Hrothgar insisted on calling calming earth tones, but which looked suspiciously like the color of dried blood. My quarters were in the human section, which had been designed according to our submitted specifications, and apparently built by someone who'd never seen a human, but had heard we were roughly cylindrical and prone to bumping into things. The bed was too short, the ceiling was too low, and the door made a sound like a dying walrus every time it opened. But the real fun started at the welcome reception. The main diplomatic hall was a sight to behold. If you beheld it through the eyes of someone who thought that cramming representatives from 47 different species into one room was a recipe for meaningful dialogue rather than spectacular disaster. The Vorthak delegation had claimed the high ground near the windows, their ceremonial armor glinting in the artificial starlight. The Zalani clustered around the quantum-encrypted communication stations, probably running 17 different conversations simultaneously. The Hrothgar had found the quietest corner and were doing something that looked like meditation, but could easily have been tactical planning. And then there were the humans. Ambassador Peterson was deep in conversation with a Regelian trade minister about shipping routes. Dr. Lisa Chen was enthusiastically explaining human reproductive biology to a group of increasingly uncomfortable-looking captain scientists. Trade negotiator Williams, no relation to Secretary Williams, which confused everyone, was arguing with someone about tariff schedules, and everyone was watching me. "Colonel Cross!" The voice boomed across the hall with the kind of enthusiasm that makes your survival instincts start filing insurance claims. High Coordinator Zeftar approached with what I'd learned to recognize as the Vorthak equivalent of a friendly smile, which involved showing approximately 47 more teeth than was strictly necessary for communication purposes. "High Coordinator, I replied, offering what I hoped was an appropriately diplomatic nod. Thank you for the invitation. Nonsense! The pleasure is entirely ours. Zeftar gestured grandly to the assembled crowd. We have all been looking forward to your insights. There was something in the way he said insights that made me think of a nature documentary narrator describing a predator's hunting patterns. Around us, conversations had subtly shifted, and I realized that half the room was now listening while pretending not to. I'm not sure what insights I can offer, I said carefully. I'm just here to observe and maybe answer a few questions about human diplomatic protocols. Ah, yes, protocols! A new voice joined the conversation. Prime Negotiator Silthes of the Zalani delegation, their crystalline features refracting the room's light in patterns that probably meant something, but which hurt to look at directly. We have been most curious about human protocols, particularly regarding the creative solutions your species tends to favor. Creative solutions? For instance, Silthes continued, we have heard that humans once resolved a trade dispute by convincing both parties that their currencies had been blessed by an ancient space deity, and were therefore too sacred to spend. I blinked. Where did you hear that? Intelligence reports from the Altair incident 3 years ago. That wasn't a trade dispute, that was a... How did you even... I stopped myself. Look, that's not really representative of standard human diplomatic practice. No? Zeftar leaned in closer. Then perhaps you could enlighten us about what is representative. And that's when I realized I was in trouble. Because the thing about explaining human diplomatic practice to aliens is that you can't really explain it without explaining why it works. And you can't explain why it works without explaining how humans think. And you can't explain how humans think without accidentally revealing that most of our success comes from the fact that we're just weird enough to be unpredictable. Well, I said slowly, the main principle is adaptive flexibility. Adaptive flexibility. This from Defense Advisor Gromph, who had materialized beside us with the kind of stealth that suggested his people's definition of advisor was somewhat broader than most. We try not to get locked into rigid approaches. If something isn't working, we try something else. If that doesn't work, we try something completely different. The idea is to keep adapting until we find a solution that works. And if no conventional solutions work, Silthes asked, then we try unconventional ones. Such as? And here's where I should have just said trade negotiations or economic incentives or something equally boring and diplomatic. Instead, my brain decided to be helpful. Well, there was this one situation where we were trying to negotiate a mining rights agreement with a species that communicated entirely through interpretive dance. Our negotiator learned their entire cultural repertoire and then choreographed a 17-hour interpretive dance that basically amounted to, we'll give you really good rates on shipping if you let us dig up your moon. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes you realize you've said something that will be quoted in intelligence reports for the next century. 17 hours? Gromph said finally. It was a complicated agreement. There were subsections. And this worked? Zeftar asked. Oh, absolutely. Turned out they'd been waiting 3 centuries for someone to properly appreciate their dance-based legal system. They were so excited they threw in mineral rights to 2 additional moons and invited us to their annual festival of contractual celebration. More silence. Around us, I could see other delegates subtly adjusting their positions to get better listening angles. Colonel Cross, Silthes said carefully, how many of these unconventional approaches has your species developed? And that's when I made my second mistake of the evening. Oh, depends on the situation. We've got something for every occasion. Cultural exchange programs, economic partnership initiatives, technological cooperation agreements, mutual defense pacts, joint research ventures. I was counting them off on my fingers now, which in retrospect was probably a mistake. Educational exchanges, humanitarian aid programs, sports diplomacy, culinary diplomacy, artistic collaboration, musical cooperation, trade route optimization, resource sharing agreements, environmental protection treaties, scientific cooperation protocols. I became aware that I was still counting, and that everyone was still listening. Diplomatic marriage arrangements, ceremonial adoption protocols, ritual combat substitution agreements, shared mythological narrative development, cross-species therapeutic programs, interplanetary cultural festivals, collaborative terraforming projects, joint exploration initiatives, and something we call aggressive friendship, which is probably exactly what it sounds like. The silence this time lasted long enough for me to wonder if I'd broken something important. Aggressive friendship? Gromth said in a tone that suggested he was filing this information under things to worry about later. It's when we decide someone is going to be our friend whether they like it or not, and we keep being helpful and supportive and available until they give up and accept that we're part of their lives now. And this works? You'd be surprised how effective persistence can be when it's applied with sufficient enthusiasm and a complete disregard for normal social boundaries. Ambassador Peterson appeared at my elbow with the timing of someone who'd been monitoring the conversation from across the room, and had finally decided it was time to intervene before I accidentally declared war on someone. Colonel Cross, I believe there are some folks from the Centauri delegation who wanted to meet you. Of course, I said, grateful for the rescue. Excuse me. As we walked away, I could hear the beginning of what was going to be a very interesting conversation behind us. Did he just describe systematic cultural assimilation? Silthes was saying. I think he described something worse than that, Zeftar replied. I think he described making it look like friendship. Peterson guided me to the other side of the room, where the Centauri delegation was clustered around what appeared to be a holographic display of shipping routes. Strategic Advisor Kenthavar, Peterson said. I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Colonel Cross. Kenthavar was tall even by Centauri standards, with the kind of bearing that suggested he'd spent a lot of time thinking about the best ways to kill people, and had come up with several innovative approaches. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, and his smile was the sort that didn't quite reach his eyes. Colonel Cross, your reputation precedes you. So I'm told. I hope it's not too alarming. That depends, Kenthavar said, gesturing to the holographic display, on whether this is an accurate representation of human shipping patterns. I looked at the display and immediately saw the problem. Someone had been tracking human trade routes and had apparently noticed that our shipping patterns made no sense from a traditional economic perspective. Instead of following efficient direct routes between trading partners, our cargo vessels seemed to wander all over the galaxy, making stops at planets that didn't appear to be economically significant. This is interesting, I said carefully. Indeed. According to our analysis, human cargo vessels visit an average of 4.7 additional destinations per route, with an average delay of 23% over optimal travel time. The additional costs should make this approach economically non-viable, yet human trade continues to expand. I studied the display more carefully. What I was looking at was actually a pretty accurate representation of how human shipping worked. But explaining it was going to require explaining some things about human psychology that I wasn't sure I wanted to get into. Well, I said finally, efficiency isn't always the most important factor in trade relationships. No. Sometimes building trust is more valuable than saving time. Sometimes learning about new markets is worth a few detours. Sometimes you stop by somewhere just to check in and see how things are going. Check in? You know. See if they need anything. Make sure they're doing okay. Maybe have dinner. Play some games. Exchange stories. The sort of thing you do with friends. Kenthavar stared at me. You're conducting interstellar diplomacy through casual social visits? Among other things, yes. But the economic analysis shows that we're spending more money than we need to in order to maintain relationships with people we don't strictly need to trade with. I finished. Yeah, that's about right. But why? And here's where I should have said something about long-term strategic planning or market development or risk diversification. Instead, I told the truth. Because that's what friends do. You check in on people. You help out when you can. You show up when it matters. Maybe today someone doesn't need anything from us, but maybe next year they'll have a problem and we'll be able to help. Maybe the year after that, we'll have a problem, and they'll remember that we were there when they needed us. This is your trade strategy? Making friends? It's our everything strategy, I said. Making friends, keeping friends, helping friends, defending friends. It's not really complicated. Kenthavar looked at the holographic display again, then at me, then back at the display. Colonel Cross, he said slowly. According to our projections, maintaining this approach would require a level of resources and coordination that suggests... That suggests what? That suggests your species is either engaging in systematic preparation for large-scale conflict, or is so wealthy that you can afford to treat interstellar trade as a social activity. I thought about that for a moment. What if it's both? The expression on Kenthavar's face suggested that this was not the answer he'd been hoping for. Both? What if we're wealthy enough to treat trade as a social activity precisely because we've been preparing for large-scale conflict? What if the best way to avoid war is to make sure everyone you might fight is already your friend? What if the most effective military strategy is to build a galaxy full of people who would rather fight beside you than against you? Around us, I became aware that the conversation level in the room had dropped noticeably. Again, Colonel Cross, Kenthavar said very carefully. Are you describing a military strategy or a diplomatic one? Is there a difference? The look he gave me suggested that this was definitely going in someone's intelligence report. I think, Peterson said with the kind of diplomatic smoothness that comes from years of practice at damage control, that what Colonel Cross is describing is simply the human approach to building lasting partnerships through mutual benefit and shared interests. Right, I said, grateful for the clarification. Mutual benefit, shared interests, making sure everyone wins. And if someone doesn't want to win, Kenthavar asked, then we help them figure out how to want to win. And if they still don't want to? I considered this. Well, that's never actually come up. I mean, who doesn't want to win? The silence that followed this question was loaded with the kind of implications that make historians write very interesting footnotes. Colonel Cross, came a new voice from behind us. Might we have a word? I turned to find myself facing what was apparently a joint delegation from 3 different species, all of whom had the look of people who'd been comparing notes and had come to some mutually disturbing conclusions. Of course, I said, because at this point, what was the worst that could happen? Chapter 3. The interrogation disguised as a friendly chat. The joint delegation consisted of Intelligence Coordinator Vexthul from the Rigelian Commonwealth, Strategic Analysis Officer Mordek from the Outer Rim Coalition, and someone who introduced herself as Cultural Assessment Specialist Nithara from the Independent Systems Alliance. They had requisitioned a smaller conference room for what they described as an informal exchange of perspectives, which in diplomatic speak usually translates to, "We're about to ask you questions that will determine whether we need to be afraid of you." The conference room was decorated in what I'd learned to recognize as aggressively neutral decor. Beige walls, beige furniture, and beige lighting designed to avoid offending anyone's aesthetic sensibilities while simultaneously making everyone equally miserable. The table was oval-shaped, probably to avoid any implications about power structures, and had built-in translation interfaces that hummed quietly with the sound of 17 different linguistic processing systems. "Please have a seat," Vexthul said, gesturing to a chair that had clearly been sized for humans. Either they'd done their research or they'd gotten very lucky with their furniture choices. I sat down and immediately realized that this was going to be more formal than I'd anticipated. Each of my conversation partners, had brought tablets, recording devices, and what appeared to be prepared lists of questions. Nithara had even brought what looked like a briefcase full of documents. "Colonel Cross," Mordek began, "we hope you don't mind, but we've been comparing notes about some of your previous statements regarding human diplomatic and military practices." "Comparing notes?" "Yes, and we've found some inconsistencies that we'd like to clarify." Vexthul leaned forward. "For instance, you've described human trade practices as being based on making friends, but our analysis suggests a level of strategic coordination that implies central planning on a galactic scale. You've mentioned adaptive flexibility in diplomatic approaches," Mordek added, "but the examples you've provided suggest systematic preparation for a wide range of contingencies that goes far beyond normal diplomatic planning. And," Nithara concluded, "you've consistently described these approaches as spontaneous or intuitive, but the results suggest a level of effectiveness that typically requires extensive training and coordination." I looked at the 3 of them, then at their recording devices, then at the briefcase full of documents. "Are you asking me whether humans have some kind of secret manual for galactic domination?" "Do you?" Vexthul asked immediately. "No." "Then how do you explain the patterns?" "What patterns?" Nithara opened her briefcase and pulled out what appeared to be a comprehensive analysis of human diplomatic activities over the past 15 years. The document was thick enough to be used as a weapon and detailed enough to be classified as an invasion of privacy. "According to our research," she said, flipping through pages, "human diplomatic missions have achieved unprecedented success rates in conflict resolution, trade negotiation, and alliance building. Your species has managed to establish positive relationships with 43 different civilizations, many of whom had previously been in conflict with each other." "That's good?" "It's statistically impossible," Mordek said flatly. "The probability of achieving this level of diplomatic success through random chance or natural ability is approximately 0.003%. So either," Vexthul continued, Your species possesses some form of diplomatic ability that fundamentally exceeds anything previously recorded in galactic history. Or you're operating according to a systematic approach that you're choosing not to disclose. I stared at them. You think we're lying about being naturally good at making friends? We think, Nithara said carefully, that the level of coordination required to achieve these results suggests either superhuman intuitive abilities or a very sophisticated training program. What kind of training program? That's what we're hoping you can tell us. I leaned back in my chair and considered my options. I could try to explain that humans were just naturally social creatures who happened to be good at improvisation. I could attempt to describe the way human culture encouraged adaptability and creative problem-solving. I could even try to get into the psychology of how growing up on a planet with thousands of different cultures had given us practice at finding common ground with people who didn't think like us. Or I could tell them the truth, which was that most of our diplomatic success came from the fact that humans were just weird enough to be unpredictable and just stubborn enough to keep trying things until something worked. Okay, I said finally, let me ask you something. What do you think the most important skill for a diplomat is? The three of them exchanged glances. Strategic thinking, Vexthul suggested. Cultural sensitivity, offered Nithara. Information management, said Mordek. Those are all good answers, I said. But here's the thing. Humans don't really train diplomats the way you probably think we do. No? No. We take people who are good at talking to other people, and we give them some background information about whoever they're going to be talking to, and then we send them out to figure it out as they go. Silence. That's it? Mordek said. That's it. But the coordination, Vexthul protested. The systematic approaches, the consistent results. Oh, that's not coordination, I said. That's just humans being humans. Meaning? Meaning that if you take a human and put them in a room with someone they've never met before, they're going to try to find something they have in common. They're going to try to figure out what the other person needs and whether they can help provide it. They're going to try to make the other person laugh, or at least smile. And if none of that works, they're going to try something else. But the patterns suggest that humans approach every diplomatic situation the same way we approach meeting someone at a party. I interrupted. We try to be interesting. We try to be helpful. We try to be memorable for the right reasons. And if someone seems upset or angry or scared, we try to figure out why and see if there's anything we can do about it. Nithara was taking notes now. And this approach works. How often? Most of the time. I mean, think about it. How often do you meet someone who doesn't respond well to genuine interest and helpfulness? But what about situations where conflict is inevitable? Mordek asked. Where interests are fundamentally incompatible. Then we try to figure out if they're really incompatible, or if they just look incompatible because we don't understand the situation well enough. And if they really are incompatible, then we try to figure out if there's a way to change the situation so that they're not incompatible anymore. And if there isn't? I considered this. Then we try to figure out if we can live with losing, or if we need to figure out how to win without making the other guy lose. And if that's not possible either, then we get creative. The three of them stared at me. Creative how? Vexthul asked slowly. Well, that depends on the situation. Maybe we find a third option that nobody had thought of. Maybe we change the rules of the game. Maybe we convince everyone involved that they're really solving a different problem than they thought they were solving. Could you provide an example? And here's where I should have just made something up. Something safe and boring and hypothetical. Instead, I told them about the Kepler incident. Okay, so about 5 years ago, we had the situation where two different species were claiming the same star system. Both groups had legitimate historical claims. Both groups needed the resources, and both groups were prepared to fight for it. Traditional diplomacy had failed. Mediation had failed. Economic incentives had failed. Everyone was convinced that war was inevitable. And, Nithara prompted, and our negotiator looked at the situation and realized that both species were assuming they needed to control the system in order to benefit from it. So she proposed something different, which was joint custody. Mordek blinked. Joint custody? Like divorced parents sharing time with their kids. 6 months of the year, Species A gets to use the system however they want. 6 months of the year, Species B gets to use it however they want. During the transition periods, they cooperate on maintenance and infrastructure development. And this worked? Better than anyone expected. Turned out that having to hand over a functional system every 6 months motivated both groups to take really good care of it. Plus, they started sharing techniques and technology to make the transition smoother. Within 2 years, they were so integrated that they just decided to make it permanent and split everything 50-50.
But surely this was an unusual situation, Vexthal said.
Not every conflict can be resolved through
joint custody.
No, but that's not the point. The point is that there's always some assumption everyone's making about how the problem has to be solved.
And if you can figure out what that assumption is, sometimes you can just ignore it and try something else.
Such as? Well, there was the trade route dispute of 2159. Everyone assumed that shipping rights were zero-sum. If one species got preferred access, everyone else would lose out. So our negotiator suggested that instead of fighting over existing routes, they should work together to develop new ones. Ended up opening 3 new shipping corridors and tripling trade volume for everyone involved. Or the cultural heritage crisis on Rigel 7, I continued, warming to the subject. 2 different groups claiming the same sacred sites, each insisting that the other group's presence would be desecration. Traditional solution would have been to split the sites or establish visiting schedules. But our anthropologist realized that both groups were actually trying to honor the same ancient civilization, just from different historical perspectives. So instead of splitting up the sites, they established a joint research project to better understand their shared heritage.
Now they're co-authoring papers and comparing mythologies.
I became aware that all 3 of my interrogators were staring at me with expressions that ranged from fascination to concern.
Colonel Cross, Nithara said slowly, how many of these creative solutions has your species developed?
I don't know. Hundreds? Thousands? We don't really keep count.
You don't keep count? Why would we?
I mean, every situation is different. The solution that works for a trade dispute probably won't work for a territorial conflict. The approach that works with one species might be completely wrong for another species.
You just figure it out as you go.
Mordek was furiously taking notes now.
But surely there must be some underlying principles, some systematic approach.
Well, yeah. Don't be a jerk. Try to understand what people actually want instead of what they say they want. Look for win-win solutions. If you can't find a win-win solution, try to find a win-win-win solution. If that doesn't work, see if you can change the game entirely. Change the game? You know. Instead of fighting over who gets the prize, make the prize bigger. Instead of arguing about who's right, figure out how everyone can be right. Instead of competing for limited resources, find a way to create unlimited resources.
Unlimited resources? Vexthal said sharply.
Sure. I mean, most resource conflicts are really about access, not scarcity. Like the Tau Ceti water wars. Everyone was fighting over who got to use the ice mining facilities. But the real problem was that the facilities couldn't process enough ice to meet demand. So instead of fighting over limited access to inadequate facilities, we helped them build better facilities. Now there's enough processed water for everyone, plus a surplus they can trade to other systems. You have solved a resource war by eliminating scarcity?
It's not that hard when you think about it. Most scarcity is artificial anyway.
It's caused by inefficient systems, poor resource management, or people hoarding things they don't actually need. The 3 of them exchanged looks that were definitely going to result in some very interesting intelligence reports.
Colonel Cross, Vexthal said carefully, when you say most scarcity is artificial, what exactly do you mean?
I mean that in a galaxy this big, with this many different planets and this many different technologies, there's really no excuse for anyone to go without basic necessities. The only reason people fight over resources is because the distribution systems are broken. And humans fix distribution systems? Among other things. As a diplomatic strategy? As a basic courtesy. I mean, if you're visiting someone's house and you notice their plumbing is broken, you offer to help fix it, right? Same principle. Nithara looked up from her notes. Colonel Cross, are you telling us that human diplomacy is based on helping people fix their problems? More or less. All of their problems? Well, we try. Obviously, we can't solve everything, but most problems aren't really that complicated once you understand what's causing them. And what usually causes them? Poor communication, mostly. People making assumptions about what other people want or need. Systems that work fine on a small scale but break down when they get too big. Old solutions being applied to new problems. That sort of thing. Mordek set down his tablet and looked at me directly. Colonel Cross, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Is your species trying to take over the galaxy? I blinked. What? No! Why would we want to take over the galaxy? To control it? But we don't want to control it. Controlling things is a huge pain in the ass. You have to make decisions for everyone. You have to solve everyone's problems. You have to deal with everyone's complaints. Who wants that kind of responsibility? Then what do you want? We want everyone to be happy and healthy and prosperous and getting along with each other so that we can all focus on more interesting things than fighting over who gets to be in charge. Silence.
More interesting things such as? Vexthal asked.
Science, art, exploration.
Building cool stuff.
Figuring out how the universe works. Meeting new people. Trying new foods. Learning new languages. Playing new games.
I was getting excited now.
I mean, think about all the amazing things we could accomplish if we weren't wasting time and energy on wars and conflicts and resource disputes. We could be mapping new star systems, developing new technologies, creating new art forms, solving the mysteries of existence.
And you believe this is achievable?
Sure? I mean, it's not like it's impossible. People are basically reasonable.
They want the same things: safety, prosperity, respect, the chance to build something meaningful for their children. The only reason we fight is because we're scared or angry or desperate. And most of the time we're scared or angry or desperate because we don't have enough information or resources or options.
So if everyone had enough information and resources and options, then everyone could focus on building instead of fighting. Everyone could work on things they actually care about instead of spending all their time defending what they already have.
The three of them sat in silence for a long moment.
Colonel Cross, Nithara said finally, do you realize what you've just described? Effective resource management? You've described a post-scarcity civilization with universal cooperation and shared goals. Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. That's not a diplomatic strategy, Mordek said slowly. That's a blueprint for galactic civilization. Is there a difference? And that's when I realized that I might have accidentally revealed something I wasn't supposed to reveal. Chapter 4. The moment everything goes sideways. The silence in the conference room was the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat and wonder if everyone else can hear it too. My three interrogators were staring at me with expressions that I couldn't quite read, but which definitely fell somewhere between fascinated and deeply concerned. Colonel Cross, Vexthal said slowly, when you describe this vision
of galactic civilization, are you speaking hypothetically or are you describing actual human policy?
And there it was.
The question I'd been trying to avoid since the moment I'd walked into this room. The question that would determine whether I was going to finish this summit as a diplomatic curiosity or as a potential security threat.
I'm describing, I said carefully, how humans tend to think about problems. That's not an answer, Mordek pointed out.
It's the only answer I can give. Nithara leaned forward.
Colonel Cross, we've been analyzing human diplomatic activities for several years now, and we've identified patterns that suggest a level of coordination and long-term planning that goes far beyond what you've described as improvisation and making friends. She opened her briefcase again and pulled out another document, this one even thicker than the first.
For example, she continued, human trade agreements consistently include provisions for infrastructure development, educational exchange, and technological cooperation that extend far beyond the nominal scope of the agreements. So these provisions create long-term dependencies and integration that make future conflicts significantly less likely.
Again,
So either your negotiators are remarkably prescient, or they're working from some kind of strategic framework that accounts for these long-term effects.
I thought about this.
What if it's both? Both? What if our negotiators are prescient because they're working from a strategic framework? What kind of strategic framework? Vexthal asked immediately.
The kind that assumes that everyone's better off when everyone's better off.
That's not a strategic framework,
Mordek protested. That's a philosophical position. What's the difference? He stared at me. Strategy is about achieving specific objectives through planned actions. Philosophy is about principles and ideals.
Right. And if your principle is that everyone should be better off, then your strategy becomes figuring out how to make everyone better off.
But that's not how strategy works, Nithara said.
Strategy is about maximizing your own advantages relative to potential competitors.
Why?
Because that's what strategy is. Says who?
Another silence. This one lasted long enough for me to start wondering if I'd broken something fundamental about their worldview. Colonel Cross, Vexthal said eventually. Are you telling us that humans don't think in terms of competitive advantage?
Not exactly. I mean, we compete about things. Sports, games, who can tell the best joke at a party?
But when it comes to important stuff, survival, prosperity, security, we tend to think in terms of team sports rather than individual competition.
Team sports?
You know,
everyone on the team works together to achieve a shared goal. The goal isn't to beat your teammates, it's to beat the other team.
And who is the other team? Entropy, scarcity, ignorance, disease.
The various forces that make life difficult and unpleasant. I could see them processing this, and I could see that it wasn't computing properly. But surely, Mordek said, you must have contingency plans for situations where cooperation fails, where conflict becomes unavoidable. Of course. Could you describe them? And here's where I should have said something vague about defensive protocols and humanitarian intervention. Instead, I told them about the preparation protocols. Well, the basic principle is that the best way to win a fight is to make sure the fight never happens in the first place. How? By making sure that anyone who might want to fight you either doesn't want to anymore, or can't afford to, or has better things to do. And if that doesn't work, then you make sure that fighting you would be more expensive than not fighting you. And if that doesn't work either, then you make sure that fighting you would be impossible. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Impossible how? Nithara asked very quietly. Oh, you know, economic warfare, information warfare, psychological warfare, technological warfare, biological warfare, temporal warfare, dimensional warfare. I found myself ticking off options again, which I really needed to stop doing. Reality manipulation, causality engineering, existence editing, that sort of thing. Dead silence. Existence editing? Vexthul said in a tone that suggested he really hoped he'd misheard me. Sure. I mean, if someone's really determined to fight you, and you can't talk them out of it, and you can't make it too expensive, and you can't make it impossible through conventional means, sometimes you have to get creative with the fundamental nature of reality. Could you elaborate on that? Well, the easiest approach is usually temporal adjustment. You go back and prevent the conditions that led to the conflict in the first place. But that's kind of a blunt instrument, and it tends to have side effects. More elegant approaches involve probability manipulation, causal restructuring, or selective reality editing. Selective reality editing? You know, like editing someone out of existence, but only the parts of their existence that are causing problems. Leave the good parts, delete the problematic parts, maybe add some better parts to fill in the gaps. I became aware that all three of my interrogators had stopped taking notes and were staring at me with expressions of what could generously be called existential terror. Colonel Cross, Mordek said slowly, are you describing actual human capabilities, or are you describing science fiction? I'm describing contingency planning. For capabilities that don't exist? For capabilities that don't exist yet. Yet? Well, you never know what might become necessary. Better to have the plans ready just in case. Vexthul cleared his throat. Colonel Cross, when you say plans, do you mean theoretical frameworks, or do you mean actual implementation strategies? I mean whatever level of preparation seems appropriate for the potential threat level. And what determines the threat level? Oh, you know, standard risk assessment, probability analysis, worst-case scenario planning, best-case scenario planning, most likely case scenario planning, impossible case scenario planning. That would never happen, but let's plan for it. Anyway, scenario planning. How many scenarios do you plan for? Nithara asked. All of them. All of them? Well, you can't really be too prepared, can you? I mean, the universe is a big, weird place full of unexpected things. Better to have plans you don't need than to need plans you don't have. I was starting to realize that this conversation was not going in a direction that would result in improved interspecies relations. Colonel Cross, Vexthul said very carefully. When you say you plan for all scenarios, are you including scenarios that involve conflict with other galactic civilizations? Of course. Including civilizations that are currently allied with humanity? Especially those. Why especially those? Because they're the ones who would know our standard operating procedures. Fighting strangers is easy. You just do whatever they're not expecting. Fighting friends is harder, because they know what you're capable of, and they know how you think. You have to be really creative. The silence that followed this statement was so complete that I was pretty sure I could hear the ship's life support systems humming 3 decks away. Colonel Cross, Nithara said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Do you have contingency plans for fighting us? Of course. Could you describe them? And that's when I finally realized that I was in serious trouble. You know what? I said, standing up abruptly. I think maybe we should continue this conversation later. I should probably check in with Ambassador Peterson. Colonel Cross, Mordek said,
also standing. I think it would be better if you remained here for a few more minutes. Am I under arrest? You're not under arrest, Vexthul said, but he was also standing now, and I noticed that all three of them had positioned themselves between me and the door. We just have a few more questions. Such as? Such as, Nithara said, whether the human delegation to this summit is aware of your extensive knowledge of contingency planning. What do you mean? We mean, Mordek said, that either you're a rogue operative who's been sharing classified information, or you're here as part of a systematic intelligence operation designed to assess potential threats and gather information about other species' defensive capabilities. I looked at the three of them, then at the door they were blocking, then at the recording devices that were still running. Or, I said slowly, I'm just a guy who talks too much, and you're reading way more into this than you should be. Are we? Vexthul asked. Yeah, I think you are. Then prove it. How? Tell us something that proves you're not an intelligence operative. I thought about this. Like what? Like classified information that you shouldn't have access to if you're just a military liaison. But if I give you classified information, that would prove that I am an intelligence operative. Exactly. So you want me to prove I'm not a spy by either giving you classified information, which would prove I am a spy, or by not giving you classified information, which you'll interpret as proof that I'm hiding something. That's about the size of it, Mordek said. You realize that's a logical trap, right? Yes. And you realize that the only way out of a logical trap is to reject the underlying assumptions? What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe the problem isn't whether I'm a spy or not. Maybe the problem is that you're asking the wrong questions.
Such as? Such as, why are you so worried about human contingency planning?
What are you planning to do that would make you concerned about whether we have defenses against it? The three of them exchanged glances that were loaded with about 17 different layers of subtext. Colonel Cross, Vexthul said carefully. We're not planning anything. Then why do you care whether we're prepared for anything? Because, Nithara said, the level of preparation you've described suggests capabilities that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in this galaxy. Alter it how? By making conventional military force obsolete. I thought about this. Would that be a bad thing? It would if only one species had access to those capabilities. But we've been sharing our capabilities. Have you? Of course.
I mean, look at our trade agreements.
We've been sharing technology, research, educational resources, infrastructure development techniques. We've been teaching people how to optimize their resource distribution, how to resolve conflicts, how to build better systems. But not, Mordek said, the really advanced capabilities. Not the existence editing and reality manipulation. Well, no, that stuff's dangerous. You don't teach people how to edit reality until you're sure they're not going to accidentally delete themselves. Or until you're sure they're not going to use it against you. That too. Another loaded silence. Colonel Cross, Vexthul said. I need to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Okay. Is humanity planning to conquer the galaxy? I looked at him. Then I looked at the other two. Then I looked at the door they were still blocking. No, I said finally. We're planning to save it. From what? From itself. And that's when the alarms started going off. Chapter 5. When things go from bad to oh hell. The alarm wasn't the gentle chime that usually indicated dinner was ready, or someone had an announcement to make. This was the kind of alarm that suggested someone was about to die, possibly everyone, and probably very soon. Red lights started flashing, automated voices began speaking in 17 different languages, and the ship's gravity briefly hiccuped in a way that made my stomach think we were falling. What the hell? I started to say, but Vexthul cut me off. Emergency protocols, he said, pulling out what looked like a military communicator. All delegations to secure positions. Unknown vessels approaching at high velocity. Unknown vessels. Mordek was already at the room's emergency console, pulling up a tactical display that showed our position relative to the approaching ships. 3 vessels, no transponder signals, closing fast on an intercept course. Pirates? Nithara suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. Too coordinated, Mordek said. Too precise. This is military. The ship shuddered as something that definitely wasn't a friendly greeting hit our shields. Outside the conference room, I could hear running footsteps and shouted commands in several different languages. Colonel Cross, Vexthul said, turning to me with an expression that had shifted from suspicious to grimly practical. What would human protocols call for in this situation? That depends, I said, moving to look at the tactical display. Are those ships trying to capture us or destroy us? Does it matter? It matters a lot. Capture protocols and destruction protocols are completely different. Another impact, stronger this time. The lights flickered, and somewhere in the ship's depths, something made a sound like a dying whale. Based on the attack pattern, Mordek said, studying the display, I'd say capture. They're targeting engines and communications, not life support or main power. Okay, that's good news. How is that good news? Nithara demanded. Because capture protocols are usually recoverable. Destruction protocols tend to be more final. Recoverable how? Vexthul asked. And that's when I realized that I was about to have to explain human hostage rescue procedures to 3 people who, up until about 5 minutes ago, had been convinced that I was either an idiot or a spy. Well, I said, moving to the room's communication panel. First, we need to figure out who's attacking us and why. How do we do that? We asked them. I activated the panel's general broadcast system and spoke in the direction of the pickup microphone. Unknown vessels, this is Lieutenant Colonel David Cross of the Terran Diplomatic Corps aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Dream. You are attacking a ship carrying diplomatic representatives from multiple species engaged in peaceful negotiations. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. For a moment, there was only the sound of static and the continuing rumble of impacts against our shields. Then a voice responded, harsh, metallic, and speaking in accented galactic standard. Terran vessel, you are harboring criminals and enemies of the hegemony. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. I looked at the others. Hegemony. The Korath hegemony, Mordek said grimly. They're from the Outer Rim. Militant expansionists. They've been claiming that the Peace Council's diplomatic activities constitute interference with their sovereign rights. And they think we're harboring criminals? They think anyone who opposes their expansion policies is a criminal. Another impact, and this time the lights went out completely for several seconds before the emergency power kicked in. Terran vessel, the voice said again. You have 30 seconds to comply before we begin cutting through your hull. I looked at the tactical display, then at my 3 companions, then at the communication panel. Unknown Korath vessels, I said. This is a diplomatic vessel operating under the protection of the Galactic Peace Accords. Any attack on this ship constitutes an act of war against 47 different civilizations. The Korath hegemony does not recognize the authority of the so-called Peace Council, came the reply. You have 20 seconds. Okay, I said, turning away from the communication panel. New plan. What new plan? Vexthul asked. The plan where we don't get captured by militant expansionists who think diplomacy is a crime. And how do we implement this plan? First, we need to buy some time. Second, we need to figure out what they actually want. Third, we need to give them something that isn't what they want, but looks enough like what they want that they'll go away happy. That's not a plan, Nithara protested. That's improvisation. Welcome to human crisis management. I turned back to the communication panel. Korath vessels, I need to speak with your commanding officer. You are speaking with Command Leader Thaxcole of the Hegemony Warfleet. Command Leader Thaxcole, I'm going to be honest with you. You've got us outgunned, and we both know you can take this ship whenever you want to. But before you do that, can I ask what you're hoping to accomplish here? There was a pause. Then, we are here to retrieve traitors to the hegemony and to demonstrate the consequences of interference with hegemony affairs. Okay, that's helpful. Can you be more specific about which traitors you're looking for? The Zalani delegation includes 3 individuals who fled hegemony space after committing acts of terrorism against hegemony installations. I looked at Mordek, who shook his head. The Zalani delegation doesn't have any hegemony refugees, he said quietly. Command Leader, I said, I think there may be some confusion here. Could you provide the names of the individuals you're looking for? Sealthus the Betrayer, Nexara the Saboteur, and Velcor the Destroyer of Worlds. I blinked. Did he just say Destroyer of Worlds? That's a hegemony military title, Vexthul explained. It means someone who's successfully led planetary siege operations. So Velcor isn't actually a traitor. He's a former hegemony military officer? Probably. I keyed the communicator again. Command Leader, are you saying that you're here to arrest former military personnel who are now serving as diplomatic representatives? We are here to arrest criminals who have betrayed the hegemony. What exactly did they do? They abandoned their posts and fled to enemy territory. Enemy territory?
Independent space, Zalani space, any space not under hegemony control. I looked at the others again. So they're here to arrest people for defecting? Essentially, yes, Mordek said. Command Leader Thax Cole, I said. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You're attacking a diplomatic vessel protected by international law in order to arrest individuals who left your territory of their own free will and are now serving as legitimate diplomatic representatives of a recognized government. They are criminals. According to whose law? Hegemony law. Which has jurisdiction where? Throughout the galaxy. Says who? Another pause, longer this time. Says the hegemony. Okay, I said. I think I see the problem here. What problem? The problem is that you're operating under the assumption that hegemony law applies to people who aren't in hegemony space, working for governments that aren't part of the hegemony, on ships that aren't hegemony property. Hegemony law applies to all hegemony citizens. Even former hegemony citizens? There are no former hegemony citizens. Citizenship is permanent. Even if someone renounces it? Renunciation is not legally possible. Even if someone is granted citizenship by another government? Other governments are not legally recognized. I turned away from the communicator and looked at my companions. Okay, I said quietly. We're dealing with true believers. This is going to be more complicated. How much more complicated? Nithara asked. The kind of complicated where normal diplomatic solutions don't work because both sides are operating from completely incompatible assumptions about how reality functions. So what do? We get creative. I turned back to the communicator. Command Leader Thax Cole, I have a proposal for you. Speak. Instead of arresting these people, what if we arranged for them to be tried in absentia by a neutral court? You could present your evidence, they could present their defense, and a panel of judges from multiple civilizations could determine whether any crimes were actually committed. There is no neutral court. There are only hegemony courts and illegal courts. Okay, what if we arrange for them to be extradited to hegemony space for trial, but with observers from the Peace Council to ensure that proper legal procedures are followed? The Peace Council has no legal authority. What if we— Terran, the voice interrupted. Your attempts at negotiation are irrelevant. Prepare to be boarded. And that's when the ship shook so hard that we all ended up on the floor, and the lights went out completely. I think, Vexathul said from somewhere in the darkness, that we've reached the limits of diplomatic solutions. Not yet, I said, feeling around for the emergency communicator. We've reached the limits of conventional diplomatic solutions. What's the difference? Conventional solutions assume that both sides want the same thing. Unconventional solutions assume that both sides think they want the same thing, but they're wrong about what that thing actually is. I found the communicator and activated it. Command Leader Thax Cole, before you board this ship, I need to tell you something important. Speak quickly. The people you're looking for aren't here. We have confirmed their presence aboard your vessel. No, you've confirmed the presence of people with the same names as the people you're looking for. But they're not the same people. A pause. Explain. Silthes, Nexara, and Velcor died in hegemony space 3 years ago. The people you think are them are actually deep-cover hegemony intelligence operatives using their identities to infiltrate the Peace Council. The silence that followed this statement lasted long enough for the emergency lighting to flicker back on. That is not possible, Thaxkel said finally. Command Leader, think about it. If you were running a long-term intelligence operation to gather information about galactic diplomatic activities, wouldn't the perfect cover be to plant operatives who appeared to be defectors? People that everyone would assume had good reason to oppose the hegemony? The hegemony does not engage in such deceptions. Of course you don't. But your intelligence services do. And if this operation is as classified as I think it is, you probably wouldn't have been informed about it. Another long pause. You are suggesting that I have been sent to arrest hegemony operatives? I'm suggesting that you might want to verify the actual status of your targets before you do something that could compromise a major intelligence operation. How would I verify this? Contact Hegemony Intelligence Command. Ask them to confirm whether Operation Deep Current is still active. I had no idea if there was an Operation Deep Current, but it sounded like the sort of thing intelligence services would call a deep cover infiltration mission. How do you know about Operation Deep Current? Thax Cole asked sharply. Holy shit. There actually was an Operation Deep Current. Because, I said, thinking fast, I'm not just a diplomatic liaison. I'm also a counterintelligence specialist, and we've been monitoring hegemony intelligence activities in this sector. You are a spy. I'm a spy whose job is to catch other spies. And right now, I'm trying to prevent you from accidentally destroying an operation that your own people spent 3 years setting up.
The ship shook again, but more gently this time.
Stand by, Thaxcol said.
I turned off the communicator and looked at the others, who were staring at me with expressions that suggested they were trying to decide whether I was brilliant or insane.
Please tell me, Vexthul said slowly, that you actually know what you're doing.
I'm buying time, I said, and hoping that hegemony command structure is bureaucratic enough that they'll spend at least 10 minutes trying to figure out whether I'm telling the truth. And if they figure out that you're not, then we move to Plan B. What's Plan B? I haven't figured that out yet. That's not reassuring. Welcome to crisis management. Most of the time, you're just trying to stay one step ahead of disaster, and hoping that something brilliant occurs to you before you run out of steps.
The communicator crackled back to life.
Terran vessel, this is Command Leader Thaxcol. We have complications.
What kind of complications? Our intelligence command confirms the existence of Operation Deep Current, but they claim to have no current assets in this sector. That's because it's a compartmentalized operation. Only the operatives and their immediate handlers know the details. But if we arrest these individuals, you'll blow the operation and probably get someone killed. But if we do not arrest them, you'll allow a successful intelligence operation to continue, and your superiors will be very pleased with your discretion and operational security awareness. But our orders were to arrest the traitors. Your orders were to arrest people you thought were traitors. Now you know they're not traitors, they're assets. Arresting your own assets would be a much bigger problem than letting suspected traitors go free.
Another long pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in Thaxcol's head, as he tried to figure out whether following his original orders or protecting a classified operation would get him in more trouble with his superiors.
Command Leader, I said, let me make this easy for you. You came here to arrest traitors. There are no traitors here.
Mission accomplished. That is not how mission accomplishment works.
Sure it is.
Your mission was based on flawed intelligence. You investigated, discovered the flaw, and prevented a major operational disaster. That's exactly the kind of initiative that gets people promoted.
Promoted? Think about it. You could have just followed orders blindly and arrested those people. Instead, you took the time to verify the situation and discovered that what looked like a simple arrest mission was actually a complex counterintelligence scenario.
Your superiors are going to be impressed by your analytical thinking and your commitment to operational security.
I could hear muffled voices in the background as Thaxcol consulted with his crew.
Terran, he said finally, assuming that your assessment is correct, what would you recommend as our next course of action? Withdraw to a safe distance. File a report recommending that the suspected individuals be kept under observation, but not arrested pending further intelligence analysis, and request clarification from command about how to proceed with ongoing Operation Deep Current assets. And what do you recommend for your ship? We continue with our scheduled diplomatic mission. Nobody mentions this incident in any official reports, and everyone pretends that this was just a routine patrol encounter. This was not a routine patrol encounter. No, but it's going to be in the reports. Because if this incident becomes public knowledge, it could compromise Operation Deep Current and expose your assets to retaliation from Peace Council security services. The Peace Council has security services?
Command Leader, the Peace Council represents 47 different civilizations. Of course they have security services. Multiple security services. Really good security services.
I was not aware of this.
That's because they're really good. Another consultation with his crew.
Terran, we are withdrawing to a safe distance, but I want to be clear that if we discover that you have deceived us in any way...
Command Leader, if I've deceived you in any way, then you've just participated in the most successful counterintelligence operation in galactic history, and you should probably ask for a transfer to intelligence services, because you're clearly wasted in Fleet Command.
That is not entirely reassuring.
It's not supposed to be reassuring. It's supposed to be accurate. The ship stopped shaking. The normal lighting came back on, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of engines moving away from us. Terran vessel, Thaxcol said. You are free to continue your mission, but we will be monitoring this sector for any signs of irregularities. Understood, Command Leader, and thank you for your professionalism in handling this situation. Do not thank me yet, Terran. We will be in contact. The communication channel went dead.
I turned around to find Vexthul, Mordek, and Nithara staring at me with expressions that had evolved from suspicious to concerned. to something that might have been terrified respect. Did you just, Vexathul said slowly, convince a hegemony war fleet to retreat by making them think they were about to arrest their own spies? More or less. Using intelligence that you improvised on the spot? Pretty much. Based on a completely fictional covert operation? Well, apparently Operation Deep Current is real. I just interpreted it creatively. Mordek sat down heavily in his chair. Colonel Cross, what you just did was either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both. And if they figure out that you lied to them, then we'll deal with that when it happens. How? Creatively. Neith Ara was looking through her notes again. Colonel Cross, when you described human contingency planning earlier, you mentioned something about psychological warfare. Yes. Was that psychological warfare? I thought about it.
That was more like
Therapeutic reality adjustment. Therapeutic reality adjustment? I helped Command Leader Thaxcole understand that the situation wasn't what he thought it was, and I gave him a way to reinterpret his orders that would let him accomplish his mission without creating a diplomatic incident. By lying to him. By giving him a framework for understanding the situation that was more useful than the framework he started with. That's still lying. No, that's creative problem solving. Lying would have been telling him something I knew was false. I told him something that might have been true, and which became true as soon as he acted on it. How did it become true? Well, as soon as he reported back to his command that he'd encountered a possible counterintelligence situation, his command had to decide whether to confirm or deny the existence of Operation Deep Current. If they confirm it, then my story becomes true. If they deny it, then they have to explain why one of their ship commanders was asking about it, which means they have to investigate where he got the information, which means they have to look into his encounter with us. And then they have to decide whether it's easier to just classify the whole thing and pretend that Operation Deep Current is real, or to admit that one of their war fleets was outmaneuvered by a single diplomat on an unarmed ship. The three of them stared at me. You're saying, Vexthul said carefully, that you've created a situation where the hegemony will be forced to pretend that your fictional operation is real in order to avoid embarrassment? I'm saying that the hegemony will discover that maintaining the fiction is easier than explaining the reality. And if they decide to just come back and arrest everyone anyway, then we move to Plan C, which is, I call for help. From who? From people who are much better at this than I am. As if on cue, the ship's communication system chimed with an incoming message. Diplomatic Vessel Harmony's Dream. This is Captain Reynolds of the Terran Defense Force Vessel Persistence. We received a distress signal and are en route to your position. Please report your status. I looked at the others, then activated the communicator. Persistence, this is Lieutenant Colonel Cross aboard Harmony's Dream. Situation is complicated but currently stable. How long until you reach our position? Approximately 12 minutes, sir. We're tracking 3 hegemony vessels in your vicinity. Are they the source of your complications? They were, but I think we've reached an understanding. An understanding, sir? It's a long story, Captain. I'll brief you when you arrive. Acknowledged. Persistence standing by. I turned off the communicator and looked at my 3 companions, who were now staring at me with expressions that suggested they were trying to reconcile several different and possibly contradictory conclusions about my competence level. Colonel Cross, Nithara said finally, when you said earlier that humans don't bring military personnel to diplomatic functions because it might give people the wrong idea about your capabilities. Yes? What exactly would be the right idea? I considered this question carefully. The right idea, I said, would be that we're really, really good at making friends, and we're really, really motivated to keep our friends safe. And the wrong idea? The wrong idea would be that we're really, really good at making enemies disappear. And which one is true? Both. But we prefer the first one, because it's more fun, and it requires less paperwork. The ship's communication system chimed again. Harmony's Dream, this is Command Leader Thaxcole. The hegemony vessels are withdrawing from this sector. Please inform your colleagues that their cover remains intact. Acknowledged, Command Leader. Safe travels. Do not mistake this for friendship, Terran. Wouldn't dream of it. The channel closed, and I could hear the sound of engines moving away at high speed. Well, I said, settling back into my chair. That could have gone worse. How could it have gone worse? Vexthul asked. They could have called my bluff. What would have happened then? Then we would have discovered whether human diplomatic immunity extends to acts of creative reality revision performed in the interest of galactic peace. And does it? I have no idea. But it would have been an interesting legal precedent. Chapter 6. The Aftermath, or How to Explain the Inexplicable. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the main diplomatic hall trying to explain to 47 different species why a hegemony war fleet had just attacked their peace summit, why they'd withdrawn without actually capturing anyone, and why everyone should probably just pretend the whole thing never happened. It was not going well. "Let me understand this correctly," said High Coordinator Zeftar, his ceremonial armor still bearing scorch marks from when he'd apparently tried to manually operate a defensive turret during the attack. "You convinced the hegemony forces that their targets were actually their own intelligence operatives?" "That's a simplified version, but essentially accurate. Using information that you improvised? Using information that I creatively interpreted? And they believed you?" "Apparently." Prime Negotiator Silthas, the real Silthas, not the one the hegemony thought was a spy, had been standing very still for the past 10 minutes, occasionally making small crystalline chiming sounds that I'd learned indicated either deep thought or severe distress. "Colonel Cross," Silthas said finally, "are you aware that the individuals the hegemony was seeking to arrest are, in fact, legitimate refugees who fled hegemony space due to political persecution?" I figured that was probably the case. "And are you aware that if the hegemony discovers they were deceived, they may return in greater force and with less flexibility regarding diplomatic protocol?" "That's possible." "And are you aware that your actions may have created a situation where 3 innocent people are now being hunted by hegemony intelligence services who believe they are enemy operatives?" I paused. I hadn't actually thought about that. "That's also possible. So your solution to an immediate crisis may have created a larger long-term crisis?" "It's possible. But it's also possible that I've created a situation where the hegemony will be too confused to effectively pursue anyone, and everyone will be safer as a result." "How is that possible?" "Well, think about it from the hegemony's perspective. They sent a war fleet to arrest 3 people they thought were traitors. Instead, they discovered what might be evidence of a major counterintelligence operation that they weren't aware of. Now they have to investigate whether the operation is real, whether their intelligence services are running unauthorized missions, whether their command structure has been compromised, and whether the people they were hunting are actually the people they thought they were hunting. And while they're investigating all of that," Defense Advisor Gromth said slowly, "they're not actively pursuing anyone." "Exactly. I've given them a puzzle that's complicated enough to keep them busy for months, and confused enough that they're not sure what the right answer is supposed to be." "But what happens when they solve the puzzle?" Ambassador Peterson asked. He'd been quietly taking notes throughout my explanation, probably for the report he was going to have to file with the State Department. "That depends on how they choose to solve it." "Meaning?" "Meaning that there are several different ways they could interpret the situation, and most of them lead to outcomes that are better than what would have happened if they'd just arrested everyone." I moved to the room's holographic display and activated the presentation system. "Option 1, I said, bringing up a flowchart that I was making up as I went along. "They investigate and discover that Operation Deep Current is fictional. In this case, they have to decide whether to admit that they were outmaneuvered by a diplomat, or to classify the whole incident and pretend it never happened. Either way, they probably leave the refugees alone because pursuing them would require explaining why they'd been looking for them in the first place. Option 2, I continued, adding another branch to the chart. They investigate and discover that Operation Deep Current is real, but not what I claimed it was. In this case, they have to figure out what it actually is and whether interfering with it would cause problems with their own intelligence services. Again, they probably leave the refugees alone because they're not sure whether arresting them would interfere with their own operations. Option 3, I said, adding a third branch. They decide that Operation Deep Current is too classified for their level of access, and they just file a report saying they encountered possible intelligence complications and request guidance from higher authority. In this case, some other department becomes responsible for figuring out what to do, and ship commanders stop worrying about it. And Option 4? Silthes asked. Option 4 is that someone in the hegemony decides that the easiest solution is to just make Operation Deep Current real, assign it a fictional mission that justifies leaving the refugees alone, and file reports indicating that the situation is under control.
The room fell silent as everyone processed this. You're saying, trade negotiator Williams said slowly, that you've created a situation where the most logical response for the hegemony is to invent a fake operation to justify not pursuing people they originally wanted to arrest for real reasons? I'm saying I've given them several face-saving alternatives to continued aggression, and most of those alternatives involve leaving innocent people alone. But what if they choose none of those alternatives? Strategic advisor Kenthavar asked.
What if they simply decide to return with overwhelming force and arrest everyone regardless of the complications? Then, I said, we implement the contingency protocols. Which are? The ones that ensure that attacking peaceful diplomatic missions becomes prohibitively expensive for anyone who tries it. Such as? And here's where I probably should have just said something vague about defensive measures and international cooperation.
Instead, I told them about the really serious contingency protocols.
Well, the first level is economic sanctions.
Anyone who attacks diplomatic missions finds their trade relationships becoming complicated. Ships have trouble getting refueled, cargo has trouble getting through customs, banking transfers start experiencing mysterious delays.
That seems reasonable, Kenthavar said. The second level is technological sanctions.
Equipment starts malfunctioning, software develops bugs, navigation systems become unreliable. Nothing dangerous, just expensive and inconvenient.
Also reasonable. The third level is social sanctions.
Other species start declining invitations. Cultural exchanges get cancelled. Scientific cooperation agreements get suspended. Basically, the aggressor gets excluded from the galactic community until they decide to play nice. And if that doesn't work, then we move to the creative solutions. Such as? Well, that depends on the specific situation, but generally speaking, we help the aggressor discover that their original goals were either unnecessary, impossible, or based on misunderstandings. How? By changing the conditions that made aggression seem like a good idea. Colonel Cross, Zephytar said carefully, when you say changing the conditions, what exactly do you mean? I mean that most conflicts are caused by scarcity, fear, or misinformation. So we eliminate the scarcity, address the fear, or correct the misinformation.
And if the conflict is caused by something else, then we figure out what it's really caused by and eliminate that instead. But what if it's caused by genuine ideological differences? Then we help both sides discover common ground they didn't know they had. And if there is no common ground, then we help them find some. How do you find common ground that doesn't exist? You create it. The silence that followed this statement was the kind that makes you realize you've just said something that's going to be quoted in intelligence reports for the next century.
Colonel Cross, Nithara said very quietly, are you describing social engineering on a galactic scale?
I'm describing problem solving. But the methods you're describing would require what? Would require capabilities that approach... She paused, apparently searching for the right words. That approach the level of fundamental reality manipulation. Only if you assume that reality is fixed, I said. Most conflicts are based on assumptions about what's possible, what's necessary, and what's inevitable. Change the assumptions, and you change the conflict. But changing assumptions on that scale would require what? Would require treating entire civilizations as if they were individuals in need of therapy. I thought about that. Is that a bad thing? It's... She stopped, apparently unable to find words for what it was. It's brilliant, Gromth said suddenly. Absolutely terrifying, but brilliant. How is it terrifying? I asked. Because, Vexithul said, if humans can actually do what you're describing, then the balance of power in this galaxy isn't what any of us thought it was. What do you mean? We mean, Mordek said, that conventional military force becomes irrelevant if one species can simply rewrite the psychological and social foundations of conflict. But that's a good thing, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't it be better if conflicts could be resolved without anyone getting hurt? It would be better, Silthes said, if we could trust the species doing the resolving. And you don't trust humans? We don't know whether we should trust humans, Kenthavar said, because we're still not sure whether you're describing actual capabilities or just aspirational thinking. What's the difference? The difference, Zephytar said, is that aspirational thinking is harmless, and actual capabilities are potentially world-changing. World-changing how? Think about it.
Peterson said. If humans really can do what you've been describing, if you can really manipulate reality at the level you're suggesting, then every other species in the galaxy is essentially at your mercy. But we don't want anyone to be at our mercy, I protested. We want everyone to be free and prosperous and happy. According to your definition of free and prosperous and happy. No, according to their own definitions. But if you can manipulate the definitions... I stopped and stared and realized that I might have accidentally revealed something that I really shouldn't have revealed. Oh, I said.
Oh? Williams asked.
Oh, as in, oh, I think I understand why everyone is looking at me like I just claimed to be a deity.
Are you claiming to be a deity? Gromth asked.
No, I'm just a guy who talks too much and thinks that most problems have solutions if you're creative enough to find them.
And if you're powerful enough to implement them, Vexthol added.
Power isn't the issue, I said. Understanding is the issue. Understanding? Most conflicts happen because people don't understand each other. They make assumptions about what other people want, what other people believe, what other people are capable of. Fix the understanding and you usually fix the conflict. But some conflicts are based on accurate understanding, Nithara pointed out. Some people really do want incompatible things. Do they? Or do they want compatible things that they think are incompatible? What's the difference? Well, let's say two species both want to be safe. That's compatible. Everyone can be safe at the same time. But if both species think that being safe requires controlling the same territory, then their approaches to safety become incompatible. Right. So the question becomes, do they really need to control the same territory to be safe, or do they just think they do? And if they just think they do, then you help them figure out alternative approaches to safety that don't require territorial control. Such as mutual defense agreements, trade partnerships, shared early warning systems, cultural exchange programs, joint research projects, intermarriage, shared mythology, common enemies, collective goals that require cooperation. And if they really do need to control the same territory, then you help them figure out why they need to control it, and whether there are ways to meet those needs without exclusive control, such as time sharing, resource sharing, functional specialization, territorial expansion, dimensional engineering, reality subdivision. I noticed that I was listing possibilities again, and that everyone was staring at me again. Dimensional engineering? Mordek said slowly. Reality subdivision? Kenthavar added. You know, I said weakly, theoretical solutions for theoretical problems. Are they theoretical? They're not currently implemented. But they could be implemented? In theory. By humans? In theory. How long would it take? That would depend on how motivated we were to find a solution. And how motivated could you become? I thought about the attack we'd just survived, and about the refugees who were still being hunted, and about the fact that 47 different civilizations were currently staring at me like I'd just announced that humans were secretly running the universe.
Pretty motivated, I said. And that's when Captain Reynolds arrived.
Epilogue. The report that nobody wanted to write. 3 days later, I was back on Earth, sitting in Secretary Williams's office, staring at a preliminary draft of what was being called the Harmony's Dream Incident Report, and wondering if it was possible to die from administrative stress.
So let me make sure I understand this, Williams said,
flipping through pages that were marked with enough security classifications to require their own security clearance.
You attended a peace summit where you were supposed to explain why we don't bring military personnel to diplomatic functions. Yes. Instead, you accidentally convinced 47 different species that humans possess reality manipulation capabilities that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. That's a simplified version of events. You then used these fictional capabilities to convince a hegemony war fleet to retreat by making them believe they were about to arrest their own intelligence operatives. That part actually worked pretty well. And now, Williams continued, every major intelligence service in the galaxy is trying to determine whether humans actually possess the capabilities you described, or whether you're just really good at making things up. What have you told them? That's classified. Above my clearance level? Above everyone's clearance level. We're still trying to figure out what our clearance level should be. Williams set down the report and looked at me directly.
Cross, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be completely honest.
Okay?
Were you making it all up? I thought about this question for a long moment. I thought about the trade routes that somehow managed to turn economic partnerships into genuine friendships. I thought about the conflict resolution techniques that seemed to work even when they shouldn't. I thought about the way human diplomats kept achieving impossible results through methods that nobody else understood. I thought about the fact that everywhere humans went, things got better. Not just for humans, but for everyone. Not through conquest or manipulation, but through something that looked suspiciously like making friends and helping out. I thought about the research facilities where human scientists were working on problems that officially didn't exist yet. I thought about the economic models that predicted market behaviors by treating entire civilizations like individual psychology cases. I thought about the social programs that seemed designed to make everyone happy, whether they wanted to be happy or not. Sir, I said finally, I honestly don't know. You don't know whether you were making it up? I don't know whether the things I described are actual human capabilities or just things that humans would be capable of if we decided we needed to be capable of them. William stared at me. There's a difference? Is there? I mean, if humans can improvise solutions to impossible problems using resources that shouldn't be sufficient and methods that shouldn't work, is there really a meaningful distinction between things we can do and things we can figure out how to do? Cross? Think about it, sir. 15 years ago, nobody thought humans could achieve the kind of diplomatic success we've achieved. But we did it anyway, because the problems needed solving and we couldn't figure out any good reasons why they couldn't be solved. So you're saying... I'm saying that maybe the question isn't whether humans can manipulate reality. Maybe the question is whether reality is as fixed as everyone assumes it is. Williams was quiet for a long moment. Cross, he said eventually. I'm going to ask you to do something, and I need you to understand that this is not a request. Yes, sir. I'm going to ask you to not mention any of this to anyone, ever again, under any circumstances. Not even to other government officials? Especially not to other government officials. The last thing we need is for our own people to start believing that we're secretly running the universe. Are we secretly running the universe? That's classified. Above my clearance level? Above my clearance level. William stood up and walked to the window overlooking the UN Plaza, where representatives from dozens of different species were conducting the kind of peaceful, productive negotiations that 15 years ago would have been considered impossible. You know what the really scary part is, Cross? What's that, sir? Everyone's acting like the things you described are possible. The aliens, our own intelligence services, even the scientists. Nobody's dismissing it as fantasy. Everyone's treating it like it's just a matter of time before humans figure out how to edit reality the way we edit documents. And that's scary because if everyone believes we can do it, we probably will. And if we can do it, we probably should. And if we should do it, then we probably will. Exactly. Williams turned back to face me. Cross, I want you to go home, take a vacation, and think very carefully about whether you want to be the person who accidentally convinced the galaxy that humans are cosmic engineers. And if I decide that I do want to be that person, then we'll have a very different conversation about your career prospects. I stood up and headed for the door, then paused. Sir? Yes? For what it's worth, I think everyone's going to be fine. Why? Because humans are really good at making friends, and we're really motivated to keep our friends safe. Everything else is just implementation details. Williams smiled, but it was the kind of smile that suggested he wasn't sure whether he should be proud or terrified. Cross? Yes, sir? Next time you attend a peace summit, try to limit yourself to explaining our shipping protocols. I'll do my best, sir. That's what I'm afraid of. Addendum. From the personal files of Secretary Williams, classification level, redacted. For the record, 3 months after the Harmony's Dream incident, shipping conflicts in the Rigel sector decreased by 73%. Trade volume increased by 400%. The number of territorial disputes requiring mediation dropped to 0. 2 previously hostile species announced joint colonization projects. The hegemony quietly rescinded their arrest warrants for the 3 refugees and issued a formal apology for administrative errors in our intelligence assessment procedures. When asked how these improvements had been achieved, human diplomatic personnel consistently reported that they had simply followed standard protocols and tried to be helpful. I have decided that I do not want to know what our standard protocols actually are. I have also decided that I definitely do not want to know what humans consider being helpful. But I have to admit, the results speak for themselves.
Maybe Cross was right. Maybe everyone is going to be fine. Maybe that's the most terrifying possibility of all.
End report. The end.